I'm Ramsey McPhillips, and I live on my family's 150-year-old, 520-acre farm adjacent to the Riverbend Landfill in McMinnville, Oregon. The issues as to whether or not the zone change will affect the compatibility of the surrounding use, i.e. the farmland, is coming into play. I think the best way I can describe that the answer is yes, is to describe briefly to you how I went about almost selling my family farm to Waste Management. I decided to sell my family farm because the issues relating to living next to the farm have become intolerable, and I felt that the landfill was inevitably going to expand. The smell, the rats, the loss of farm crops, the intolerable just conditions that I have to live with, in fact to the point of having a house deserted, have driven me to want to sell my farm. A 150-year-old historic Oregon farm. So I hired Waste Management's appraiser, Ron Woodard. Mr. Woodard took my farm and compared it to other farms around the area and came up with a price. I chose Mr. Woodard to do this appraisal because he was and is Riverbend Landfill's appraiser as well. I didn't want to cherry pick some appraiser whose appraisal would be suspect. I wanted to be very clean, that everyone would understand that Mr. Woodard does appraisals for the dump and he does them for the McPhillips family. When Riverbend Landfill refused to buy my family's farm for the highest and best use, I then hired Mr. Woodard to do a second appraisal. This appraisal is taking into consideration all of the conditions, intolerable conditions, that the landfill is overlaid on my farm, making it have less value. The difference between the highest and best use value, which includes being able to put some houses on the property, and the loss of value that no one would ever want to put a house on this property because of the landfill, is all the evidence you need to show in ORS 215-296 that the compatibility of the surrounding use has been negatively compromised substantially. Therefore, I don't see that you have the statutory ability to change the zoning from public work safety zoning to EFU land. We need to close the landfill at the end of its current footprint capacity and go back to farming. I have submitted 3 documents in support of this claim. 1, a letter from Ron Woodard of Ron Woodard Appraisals detailing the value loss of my farm as it is affected with the negative aspects of being located next to the landfill. 2, I have submitted the original resolution proclamation from 1980 signed by your predecessors, the Planning Commission and Commissioners, allowing Riverbend Landfill to become a landfill in a Goal 3 exception. In this document, you will clearly see there were conclusions and findings that allowed them to allow the landfill and get this Goal 3. They included the landfill would never smell. The landfill would only be as tall as the containment berm. The landfill would never be seen by the surrounding users because it would be protected by a 30 to 60 foot tall buffer of trees. The landfill was supposed to have been returned in 20-acre increments back to farming. There would be no vector influence, specifically no rats. You can clearly see that when Mr. Woodard did his appraisal, he used these very conditions and findings to prove that there is a loss of value. So not only is 215-296 in play here, but the very issues of the original Goal 3 exception. If you were to vacate this goal exception, it needs to go back to the conditions that were guaranteed in a covenant or contract between the county and the surrounding users, i.e. that there would be no problems and that it would return to actual farming. In fact, what they're asking to do is to vacate this exception to make the landfill bigger and to make these intolerable conditions worse. And third, I have submitted for your consideration a document which shows the actual appraisal of McPhillips Farm. I have somewhat redacted this document because frankly, I don't think it's anyone's business as to what the value of my farm is without the dump which you can imagine is quite high considering its history, that it has 2.5 miles of river running through it, beautiful views, except of course for the dump of the Coast Range, magnificent trees, class 1 soils, and beautiful homes. The value, of course, after you take into consideration that that view is compromised by a giant pile of oozing, smelling trash, is sad, to say the least. But it is there, and it is evidence that the landfill is not compatible with the surrounding farmland. Lastly, on a personal note, I would like to detail the last condition, conclusion, and finding in the Goal 3 exception taken in 1980, and that is stated one of the reasons to allow the landfill was that the surrounding property owners did not object. Well, that may be true, but let's remember what they did not object to. They did not object to a landfill that was only going to be as high as the containment berm, that was never going to smell, that was never going to be seen because of the surrounding trees, that was going to be returned to farming, that was not going to affect the value of the adjoining properties. So that was a contract between your predecessors and my family. You have broken that contract, and it's time that we end the landfill. Waste Management's Riverbend Landfill has grown to be the single biggest man-made structure this side of the Oregon Cascades. A leaking mountain of trash on the riverbank, built primarily of imported garbage from the Portland metro urban centers. It is time that the dump closes down and the Yamhill County community, so divided by this corporate behemoth, begins to heal.